What about sonship edification? So what about sonship edification? So I personally believe sonship edification is an artificial, man-made doctrine. And so my encouragement would be to reject it, as it is neither scriptural nor logical. And I'll say a few things about that. What I'm showing you here on the screen is this is a series by Brian Ross, his series on sonship edification. We'll put the link on the video. But the best analysis that I have seen of sonship edification is Brian Ross's sonship edification notes, and so we'll put the link there. But I'll cover just a few of the basics of sonship edification. And so I'm looking here, these are Brian's slides from the Grace History Project. I'm looking here at lesson 146, and we'll put this link in as well. But I'm going to go to slide 3 here. And this is the table of contents for sonship edification. And this is, the idea is that the way a believer is edified, that the way a believer is brought to maturity, is is a very regimented structure. There's level 1 and level 2 and level 3, and then there's phase 1 and phase 2 within each level. So in other words, you start off in phase 1 of level 1, and then you got to progress to phase 2 of level 1. Then once you complete that, you go to the first phase of level 2 and so on. And this is based upon Proverbs chapter 1, verses 2 and 6. So if you would get with me, Proverbs chapter 1, verses 2 and 6. Proverbs 1, verses 2 through 6. To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, and judgment and equity, to give subtlety to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsels. To understand a proverb and the interpretation, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. Now, I don't know if this is big enough for you to see, but level 1, phase 1 is verse 2. Then phase 2 is verse 3. Phase 1 of level 2 is verse 4. Phase 2 is 4b. Level 3, phase 1 is 5a. And then phase 2 is 5b and 6. Now, let me just ask you this. When you read Proverbs 1, do you get the idea in those verses that there's 3 different levels with 2 phases in each level? And it's just, there's nothing in there to suggest that, right? In other words, that is a construct, that is a framework that someone put on the verses, not that the verses tell you, okay? And those 3 different levels are not obvious in Proverbs. And what I would further say, does Paul anywhere say that, hey, there's these 3 different levels and there's phases within these levels and you could get this out of Proverbs? He doesn't say anything like that at all. So I'm not going to, Brian has lesson after lesson after lesson on this. It's incredibly thorough. It's very complete. I would encourage it. I am not going to take the time to do it, but I want to just make the observation that when you look at this construct, this framework, it's not something that you naturally get from Proverbs 1, and it's not something you get from Paul. It's just something that men have imposed on the Scriptures. In Brian's same lesson, I'm going to go to, this is slide number 12. We'll put the links in the video so you can check these out for yourself. And again, I would encourage you to look at Brian's notes because he's done a really good job with this. So this is the sonship curriculum. In other words, here's the academic content, if you will, that you're supposed to study as you progress in your sonship. And if you look at the bottom here, you can see Romans to Galatians is level 1. And then you can see Ephesians to Colossians is level 2. And then level 3 is 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. And you can see how Proverbs supposedly lines up with this framework. Now, my first comment would be, does Paul anywhere give you this sort of framework in anything that he writes? And my answer to that would be no. There's nowhere he says anything like that. Now, if you just start to look at it and think about it, what's the 3rd level? It's 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. So if 1st and 2nd Thessalonians is the third level. Level 1 is Romans to Galatians. Well, which was written first? Romans or 1st and 2nd Thessalonians? Romans, 1 Corinthians, and 2 Corinthians are all written after 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. So how did that work? Because if 1st and 2nd Thessalonians is the highest level, those were two of the first three epistles written. I just don't think the framework makes any sense whatsoever. Now, if you look at the first level, level 1, you see where it says adopted. So if the first level is adopted, what in Scripture does Paul say is the adoption? Get with me, Romans 8, verse 23. Romans chapter 8, verse 23. Romans 8:23, and not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves grown within ourselves. Now notice what this says, waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body. So what event is the adoption? It's the rapture. Let me ask you this question. Do you already have the adoption, or are you waiting for the adoption? According to that verse, you're waiting for the adoption, and you're not going to get it until the very end of the dispensation of grace. So can adoption or adopted be the first level out of 6 of them? The adoption doesn't happen until the end of the dispensation of grace. And I'm going to read this again, just Romans 8:23. Look what it says, waiting for the adoption. Do you already have it or do you not? You don't. Listen, if you're still waiting for something, you don't have it. I'll prove it to you. If you are waiting for your food at a restaurant, do you have it? You don't, because you're waiting for it to happen. So when Romans 8:23 says you're waiting for the adoption, it means the adoption is future. And this framework, which has adopted as the very first step of the 6, cannot make any sense. So the question was, what about sonship edification? So I encourage you to study this for yourself. I'd encourage you to look at Brian's notes on this and study it out. But my personal opinion is I think it's unscriptural. I think it's unnatural. I think it's illogical. I think it's unsound. And I would encourage you to prove all things and to be fully persuaded in your own mind.